Hey, what is up, you guys? It's Andy and Kat, and oh my goodness, we are actually doing a together podcast. That's what me and Andy call these podcasts that are, or these episodes that are just, valuable banter and dialogue between the two hosts, Andy and myself. I feel like for the last number of weeks and last number of episodes, we've actually been branching out and doing many really great interviews with subject matter experts across a variety of different areas. And so now it's like the two hosts, having a dialogue. So this is awesome.
Yeah, so that's been a while. So
It
that's been
has been.
it's good to
It
get
has.
back.
Yeah, and so I guess just before we popped on the air, we were thinking what we're doing, like what's on our mind right now. And obviously, Andy and I have been in the ERP consulting space, particularly like our careers are built very solidly on Oracle implementations, right? Like back in the day, decades worth of Oracle implementations. And Andy has been very, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't really been keeping a pulse on exactly what you're, where you're going with this consulting, what your consulting services. I know if you've branched out in launching books and doing other consulting services on the side, like conferences and speaking engagements and that sort. And on my end, I've actually been I've been moving away from Oracle as a technology, still doing implementations, but in various other types of ERP and even non-ERP technologies. And so we thought that we would spend a little bit of time on discussing the fact that even though you are focused in, or you choose to focus in one area of specialization of your subject matter expertise, there are always transferable skills that you can apply to new niches and new areas. And I think that's so important as a consultant because you don't want to be pigeonholed into this one thing, right?
Like, yeah, I think you and I were pretty fortunate because Oracle was, Oracle has kind of stood the test of time, and so we've had a really good career. Uh, but there have been products that have come along that kind of lasted for a few years and then just went away, right? Or they just kind of fizzled out.
Or
Um,
got bought.
or got bought, yes, and then
Mm,
just kind of rolled in. Yes, that's a good
hmm
point. Um, and one of the big things I think with that is like when people go into consulting, I think that there's a few things that happen. At least I'll maybe talk about my career. When I started, I was a user of Oracle, so I knew a little bit about it, and then I actually worked for Oracle as a revenue accountant and a biller, so I was able to use some of the different software while I was doing my job. But when I went into becoming a consultant, I had never worked as an auditor or a tax area or anything like that. I wasn't an engineer, somebody who was going into clients and actually going and doing any sort of consulting sort of behavior. And I think that depending on the route people take, if they come from more of the accounting end, often they're kind of exposed to some more general type of areas. They get some consulting under their feet. People who kind of go in and they start learning consulting sort of from the ground up. Uh, Typically, what I found was I had to learn the application. Like I had to learn the software. That was the big thing for me because I didn't have enough kind of years or um, just experience behind me that I could start to do consulting and really understand what the clients were asking for. So understanding the software was really the area that I focused on. And I think that over the years, of course, you kind of can bridge away from that. And I think you probably did the same thing because now you're really being exposed to a lot of different software. But I think from the beginning, I know that's sort of my experience at least is trying to build up that consulting experience and trying to at least provide some value to a client because it's not, when we're on site or when we're working with a client, we want to provide value. It's not just a big learning experience. We need to actually do something of value.
Absolutely. So help me understand. So what you, in your experience as a revenue accountant, like right from the get-go, you were with Oracle in their finance area or their accounting area. I mean, I would surmise that Oracle runs Oracle apps.
Yes.
Okay, it would
Yes.
be weird if they
Yeah.
didn't.
Well, yeah, there was a period where they, yeah, especially as some of the applications were becoming more mature, they were like kind of sunsetting all their old
Ah,
legacy apps
yes.
that they either built or,
Hmm.
but yes, that's right. Yeah, they do.
Okay. So
Yeah.
okay. So then at the very least, you were building like right when I'm kind of traveling back in time. And so right when Andy was just starting in consulting, you still would have had the experience as an end user of
Mhm.
Oracle applications, particularly in like, I don't know, you said
It
revenue
was
accounting,
projects.
right? So like,
Yeah, project.
projects
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
AR probably. And that's probably why
Yeah.
you like specialized in projects because
Yeah.
that's where your expertise sort of began, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Right, that's
Yeah.
cool. So yeah, so like you had that the seed, if you will, the seed that sort of launched your, I'm mixing metaphors here. The seed that launched your consulting career was that you had end user experience as a project accountant or a revenue accountant, right? So you would have been versed in projects, maybe order management, maybe receivables, and then you were able to bring that to the table from an end user perspective, right?
Right.
So I feel
Yes.
like, I mean, that in itself, like that's the beginnings of a great consultant, right?
Mm.
The reason is because you're looking, like your entire approach is on behalf of the customer right from the get-go, as opposed to somebody who has learned the technology for the sake of the technology. And I've had the experience of actually working with consultants that have, I feel like their perspectives were very different. And so the experience of working with somebody like you who has implemented, who takes the perspective of on behalf of the end user, really focuses on the application, like the effective application of the technology in the like to help me as an end user do my job or to help my area or my organization use the technology effectively, right? That is the gold star. That is the whole entire point of why customers would want to engage a consultant.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I've also had the experience of working with people who I feel have used the technology or learned the technology for the sake of learning the technology and then tried to get into consulting. Now, I mean, they were also effective, but what I noticed is that they're too technology focused. So if you
Mm.
ask them, what is, so for example, the circumstances, heavy industrial manufacturing service, they're trying to implement projects and blah, 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 right? So you would expect, like if I were to give you that scenario, you would likely give me back, these are best practices. This is what happens this is what they need. This is what their invoicing needs to look like. Usually you have field services that feed into the invoice, blah, 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 blah. And then you have to take a look at, you have to consider these particular things. But then if you're not versed in that, if you're just looking from the technology point of view, the consultant, and the consultant did this in this case, is comes up with like 20 different scenarios. Well, you can do this, or
Mm.
you can do that, or you can do this, or you can do this fourth thing that like you're basically confusing the client because really the client doesn't need to know every nook and cranning of every in and out and every possible option that the technology can do. Really, the client just cares about how the technology can be applied to their situation so that they can move on with life.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I think that when we look at the software, like especially with technology, like technology is just it just represents the activity or the event that's going on in the business. So the software itself is really it's a historical thing
Is
that's
just
tracking what's going on. And I'll just use an example. If we're in a manufacturing plant and we're building an automobile, um, the tracking of that automobile, like the work in process that's being tracked, or the goods that are going on to that automobile, in the inventory system, let's say, it's got an inventory code. It's tracking how many units you have and how many units have been taken and how many units are in progress in the manufacturing cycle. But what's going on in the system is just representing the actual work that's being done. And so for the business really is not in the business. Like if we go to Ford or any of the automakers, they're not in the business of tracking information. That there's a department that does that and they track it. They're in the business of building cars. And so like the software is meant to support that. And I think you're 100% right. Like as consultants, our job is to figure out how can the technology do it, but provide some options, but understand that these options are actually not, like, we can't get buried into the software. We have to actually understand the business process that's being done and why they're doing it. And that sometimes is really difficult for people who are early in the game, like early in their consulting career, because you just don't have the exposure and the experience. You don't the terminology. There's a lot of different things that you're kind of stuck on, but understanding that is really important. So you're right. Like people who just kind of learn the technology and say, okay, how am I going to kind of ram this solution in? They really have to look at it from the business and say, how does this solve a business problem?
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like in our industry particularly, there's two pieces of lingo that we always refer back to. Like there's two essentially high level at the high level two different types of consultants. If you're talking about software implementation, there are what's called functional consultants like you and me. So we are, representation of the business, and we're knowledgeable of how business processes work. And we usually gather requirements and do business analysis type activities all the way through to end user training, blah blah blah. And then there's also technical consultants who look at the back end. They're more focused on the customization of the product or the personalization or reporting and business intelligence. And really, it's like I feel like the industry spends a lot of time in differentiating the two. There's
Mm,
either this or this. And then the unicorn is if you can have both together,
mm.
right? The
Yeah,
functional technical consultant all in one person, right?
yeah.
And they are definitely, obviously, way more effective than either because they understand both sides. But I would argue that everyone, everyone needs to have an element of functional technical in
Yeah.
order to understand and effectively implement this for the client.
Yes, 100%. I think that pure techno-functional or functional technical resource that is out there where somebody wants to have somebody who can be a DBA and a report writer and understand all of the tables and write extensions and write code, and somebody who's a CPA or understands accounting and business processes, those people don't exist. So like somebody who is actually very strong in both, because it just takes too long to learn those skills. But you're
That's
100% right.
various
It's a
different,
lifetime.
right?
Very,
There's various
yes.
different jobs all rolled into one.
Yes, yes. And I've known people who let's say were designated accountants who went to the technical side, became a DBA or a programmer. They understand, but they just really say, look, I've kind of abandoned that my financial or my accounting knowledge because I really leave that to people who know it, and vice versa. There are technical folks who go and get an MBA or get their accounting designation. They just kind of leave the coding part of it to the side. But you're right. Like people can't just draw a hard line and say, um, as a functional consultant, I don't want to learn how the table structure is, or I don't want to learn how these different reporting options are, or even what the technical guys are talking about when they're talking about particular types of APIs or whatever sort of technical lingo there is. We want to be able to. I always think like when you get something delivered to your house, you can't just deliver something in between. Either somebody has to come out of the house to get it, or the person has to come into the house to give it. There's no way that something can just meet the border and be accepted. There has to be a bridge between the two,
Hmm.
and that's really where the skill set comes in, where we have to learn on both sides. Now, the more we can learn on either side, the more valuable we are, because like there are technical guys, programmers who are very knowledgeable on the functional side. They understand how they can translate what the customer is talking about. They understand the applications, they are really valuable because they, you don't need to explain a lot because they understand really what the client is asking for. So you're right. The more we can learn between those, the better we
hmm
are.
Yeah. And I don't feel like you need to be an absolute expert. Like I wouldn't, when I was referring to, having knowledge in the mix of functional technical, I don't think that you need to have enough knowledge to be a DBA like in 3 months or something and be able to be marketable as a DBA or like suddenly be a functional, expert in Oracle projects in the next 5 months or anything. But I was referring more to the understanding of exactly what you're saying, like understanding enough to bridge the gap between the way the technology works, perhaps, in terms of columns and tables and the integrations of it, like modular integrations, even modular integrations. Interestingly enough, I thought this would be standard, minimum standard knowledge for ERP consultants to understand. Not so.
Right.
Not so, because I've been working with recently some consultants and their knowledge actually really stops at the end of their module, let's say,
Yes.
right? And says, sort of washes hands of it and oh, you have to talk to this person because this. Whereas I feel like for you and me in particular, and everybody that I had worked with at Oracle, is that they have an understanding of all of the integrations across all of the modules, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, you might not necessarily hire them as an expert in all of these different areas, but at least they know how each talk to each other and what needs to be done, like at a quite an intimate level. So I was quite surprised with that. That's not industry standard, apparently.
Agreed 100%. Yes. And I think that's a big, I'm happy you brought that up because I think that's a big differentiator between a consultant. Like it doesn't matter what application somebody is focusing on or what area, and it could be even on the technical side, right? Like a DBA or a programmer, understanding where those boundaries are, but understanding how does this fit with the other areas? How do what are
hmm
the things that the different individuals are going to need so that we could talk clearly about it. The big thing I think is that we can better solve the client's problem, and that's really what we're trying to do. It's not
hmm
just about getting billable hours and getting a project and that kind of stuff, although that's important and that's what we want at the end. But the way we do that is by solving the client's problem, and the way
Correct.
we do that is by understanding, when they bring something up, they're not going to speak in the language that we fully understand. They're going to speak in their language. We have to translate that to say, okay, what are they actually asking? What questions can we ask back to clarify? And then can we get them the right person to help them? It was funny because a couple of years ago I was brought on. It was actually a large university. I won't say the name, but there was uh, they brought in. They said, "Hey, these guys have project costing problems." So I was brought in, and there's probably was 12 people on the call. It was a Zoom call, Teams call, whatever it was. But uh, thank goodness they didn't fly me in because it wasn't project costing, it was payroll costing. And so as we
That's
started to talk, I said, okay, well, that's, a payroll. So I said, okay, every problem was related to payroll. And I thought, wow, like, okay, it's a mistake, right? Someone didn't understand, but that was a costly mistake. When you think we were on that call for probably 45 minutes, I was taking notes because I thought, so I went back to the person who put me in there and I said, look, this is the skill set you're going to need. Um, right. I didn't kind of, and, I tried to gather as much information as I could based on the knowledge I had on the payroll end. But, you know, when you think of, okay, there was probably 10 to 12 people on the call. If I just even exclude myself, that's a very expensive mistake. Now, it's legit, it can happen, but once I was there, I'm like, I can't just tell these people I'm not the payroll person. I actually did at one point say I'm a project costing person, but let's go through these items so that we can actually start some momentum on getting this resolved. But that was really kind of a fumble where someone just kind of heard a few things, thought, okay, this must be projects. Let's put this guy in there, or they didn't understand that I was a projects person, not a
right.
payroll person, and that was the
hmm
other possibly the other side.
hmm
So Yeah.
So good thing you understood the ins and outs between payroll costing and project costing, because I mean there is overlap in terms, like there is some overlap where payroll, labor burdens need to be absorbed by the project, right?
Yes.
For sure. I mean, I
Mhm.
don't know whether or not it's sort of like it's vice versa, right? But I can see where there could have been some overlap, but really that's the extent of it, right?
Yes, that's right.
So, but good thing that you knew your area and you knew enough to differentiate that, oh, this is actually it's
Mhm.
not really project costing,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
And then you were
that's right.
able to navigate them to the right, like back on the right path.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Well, and I'm happy that you like where you're. I think at least where my head is going based on what you were just saying too is, you know, often we have the clients will, and we do this in our own lives. The clients will start to provide a half-baked solution, right? So they'll say, um, you know, I had it recently where a client asked somebody to build a report in a particular way, and the person said, "Well, that can't really be done." So when they got me involved, I said, "Okay, like, are you looking for this particular summarized data at this level?" And they said, "Yeah, that's what we're looking for." Okay, so I went back to the person and the report writer and explained it to him. Now he said, "Well, that wasn't what they asked." No, that wasn't what they asked, but they came in with a partially baked solution that they thought was going to meet their need. It's our job to really ask the question back, what exactly are you looking for? Would this
Hmm.
would this option work? Would that option work? We can't always just take what the client is asking and say go and deliver it,
No.
because
Yeah.
we don't know. For one kid a binky might be a blanket or the soother. Another kid a binky might be milk. I don't know, right? And so if we're going to get their blank, and so we have to figure out what language are they speaking to us, right? And
That's right.
and so
That's
the
right.
clients are really much the same. So
And so actually that's actually a really good segue into something that I just thought of, and that is looking at like consulting to the outcomes, right? And so in that example, like that to me is a classic example of the client trying to solution based on whatever limited knowledge that they knew or they had, with the understanding that like in the back burner they have this sort of outcome, but it's not clearly established, it's not documented, it's not sort of vetted out. And then they're like, okay, well, based on what I think we know, we should have this.
mhm.
Go make it happen. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But that's not like
Yes.
the whole entire reason why you'd want to bring in a consultant is to understand, like, as a client, really, you just need to be able to provide the outcome of what you
Mhm.
want to have happen, and then leave it to and then on the consultant side, you need to be all you have to do is to ask and gather and extract that outcome, that desired outcome from the client, right?
Yes. That's right. Yeah, and this is where I think a lot of humility comes in from the consultant side. And we all like to have the answer. We all like to look smart. And it took me quite a number of years to finally get to a place where I'm going, I don't care if in that moment I don't look smart. I'm going to ask the question. And I'll use an example. I think we might have used it on a call before. Clients will say something like, I mean, the two words that we always hear on the accounting side is reconcile and accruals, right? And so if somebody
They're
says,
big, scary words to
yes,
people who
yeah,
are not in accounting.
and so, but when they ask, how do we reconcile? I'll say, okay, can you define what reconciling is? And often they'll kind of they'll usually look at me like I'm like, okay, you're a
You're a
CPA and you're
CPA. How
asking,
do you know
and
not?
why, yeah, and so I'll start to say like, okay, are you reconciling to the account? Are you reconciling to the period? Are you reconciling in detail? Like what level, like, are you reconciling application to application? What are you
Right.
actually
What are your
reconciling?
requirements? Hmm.
What are the requirements? And what often happens is, especially if there's multiple people in the room, they'll start debating what they're talking about. And what we'll realize is that a very common word that's thrown out there, it isn't until someone starts to say, okay, let's put some boundaries and some parameters around what we're actually talking about. Because a lot of these terms are very abstract, and a lot of people say, well, I know what they mean. Well, often it really it means something in specifically to those individuals, but it's really a
Mm-hmm.
generic term.
Right.
Accruals are another one, right?
Mm-hmm.
By definition, accrual really is booking a liability, right? It's something that you owe, but some people like they use that term in other ways, and so these are the things that when we look at that, it's okay to ask the questions, and I would say early in the game, like when you're early in consulting, or if you're shifting gears to a new industry or new products, or let's say you're resurrecting your consulting career, I would say ask lots of questions and just,
Mm-hmm.
ask the questions almost like how doctors used to, I mean, I don't know if doctors do it much anymore, but doctors used to always ask a million questions, right? You know, my shoulder hurts. Okay, how have you been sleeping on it? Blah, blah, blah. What have you been eating? And some questions seem absolutely completely weird, right? You go, do you drive a lot? Or, do your kids play sports? What would that have to do with my shoulder, right? Like, but
Mm-hmm.
then you go, but they're leading into areas where they're
Mm-hmm.
saying, let me figure out what happened. And so sometimes it's just asking those questions, have some dialogue, and those questions will often trigger things for the consultant or the client as well. So
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. Absolutely. And so if we bring this conversation back to the original sort of inspiration for our dialogue today, is about transferable skills. And each of us actually has, like, no matter whether or not you are a generalist or a specialist, there are transferable skills across different either industries or technologies or subject matter areas. And so, case in point, actually, before I get to the case in point, so the key is, I mean, it's so important, especially as a consultant, to be able to market yourself in different arenas, right? And so that's the whole entire point of why you would want to identify what those transferable skills are. And it's not as simple as, like, I wouldn't necessarily say, have an area on your resume that says, hey, these are all my transferable skills. Because I feel like that's like, I don't know whether or not I'm not quite sure about that. I'm not
Yeah.
quite sure about that. It needs to be apply more, more specifically or more intimately to different areas, right?
Mhm.
I guess I'm rambling on here. So, like,
No.
for example, case in point, my career was built on Oracle implementations, right? And so I was okay. So and I understand that I'm a business analyst and a functional consultant for particularly Oracle projects, Oracle receivables, payables, like essentially financials, GL, blah blah. And then and then on the cost management side, great. So I was then called to be a part of a project that implemented a different technology, still in the ERP sector, um, but it wasn't Oracle, right? And I was able to, now the challenge was to learn the technology, but I was able to use all of that information that I had before and all that experience that I've had implementing Oracle projects. And I knew that projects had to feed into invoicing, has to feed into receivables, which has to feed into the G, like all of that stuff. I don't lose. I
Mm.
just had to apply it to a different technology,
Yep.
right? Or
Yes.
even, something not even in ERP, right? I was called to a client to help out with an insurance management implementation. Now that has nothing to do with the very little having to do with ERP specifically, right? But I
Mhm.
was able to bring in expertise from project implementation, like the actual software implementation. So what are the requirements? How do you gather the requirements? What are the reporting things? What are the integrations? Like, how does this work? What does the end user training look like? The testing, all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
That's what I mean, that each and every one of us has. And you just have to take a look within yourself and what you've done in the past. Like, what are those things that can be applied to a different industry?
Yes. Yeah, I like that. And I think that if we look, often we're like from the consulting end, typically the consultants, at least a very traditional role of a consultant, is playing the role of the external knowledge expert, right, specialist who's kind of coming in and delivering that service for a customer. if we were to flip it, and we can do that even just in our own brain and say, if I was the client, what were the questions that I would ask? And if we can do that, especially in the roles where we're playing in an area that maybe isn't in our, we're picking up technology that we aren't an expert in, is saying, what questions do I ask as a client? Because that's really what we're doing. We're really saying, hey, I have to go and ask these questions. I have to now rely probably on another um, subject matter expert to answer those questions, but it's my job to deliver this out and bridge the two and make sure that those needs are met. And I think the more we kind of develop those skills, which sometimes our personality may not fit. Like, I know my personality isn't one where I don't like, if I go order a meal in a restaurant, I don't ask a whole bunch of questions, right? Other people, they're asking, what kind of oil is the fries made in? Why was this? Or does it come with it? I really ask very few questions. And I've had to learn over the years to ask more questions to be in that space where I have to, can I actually look at it from the perspective of the customer and develop those skills as opposed to just being a teller and saying,
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what I know.
Right.
One thing I wanted to really point out here, because you talk about the resume too, and this just kind of came to mind. I just want to share. It's a little bit off the topic, but one thing I think with the resume is, I know resumes they take time to put together, and sometimes they are a struggle to get the wording right. I think of a resume as a proposal, right? And if we were to go and put a proposal together for, let's say, a year project, if we're a consulting company, we behave as we're going to go out and get work. We would put a lot of effort into that proposal. We want to get the work and we put effort into it. A resume is really the same. And I think the resume should be tailored for the particular work that we're applying. I do know it takes a lot of effort. Um, and sometimes, especially if you're asked to send your resume in for something that you don't know um, if it's really going to materialize, I would have a number of resumes available that you can just fire off, because
Yeah.
I think then you can kind of build it out with that knowledge and have more of the, like you said, the transferable skills. And maybe you don't label it as transferable skills, but you label, more of a resume. It's more explaining like, I don't want to say generalist, but you're really explaining it in the area of saying, this is what I could deliver for that client in a very, if you were to actually go and be hired for that client to actually go and drive that out.
Exactly.
So
3 keywords for that client. And that's
yeah.
why I was struggling with sort of advising on having an area for transferable skills, because it's too generic. It doesn't, like, if you're trying to please everybody, you please nobody, right? And so I really love how you brought up that approaching your resume not as like the collection of activities or experiences you've had, but really tailoring that information to what the client would care about. Like, whatever, I mean, often we don't know exactly who the client is when you're called to potentially present or be presented at this particular thing for, reasons of security or whatever have you, right? But whatever you know of that client, tailor that resume. And this is where you can draw upon that inventory of transferable skills that you'll have in the back of your head, or on, an internal document or something just to yourself, that this is where I can help you. This is the area in which I've had experience, and you have a similar issue, then, that's how I can bring you to clarity or whatever have you.
Yes, I like that.
Right. So if we were to summarize, and I always ask you this at the end, because I want this always has to be actionable,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So if you're listening to this episode, we highly recommend think about what your transferable skills are. And often, you just have to take a look at what you've done before, right? And so, Andy, what are your top three
I
things
would
that
learn.
people can implement?
Yeah, I would be a lifelong learner on business processes. I would I
Love
would
it.
constantly be looking at how a business process works. And so, just, when you go into a restaurant, how are they greeting you? How does the door work? right? Like where's the door? Like look at the whole process from, you know, how do they seat you? Where are you seated? Just look and look at it from a curiosity, not from a perspective of criticism, which I think a lot of people do. And I think if we find criticism in something, it isn't so much, well, I want them to change it for me because it wasn't convenient for me. We have to look and say, how did this come about? How did this process come about? How does it serve the business? And most businesses, even if they fell into a business process, it must serve them. Otherwise, they would change it. Now, it
Hmm.
doesn't may not serve, like they may not be aware that there's a better process that would serve them better, but at least
It works.
it works. It works. They clearly figure out that it's meeting their need. Um, and so I
Hmm.
think be a lifelong learner in business processes, because I think that's where, like, for me and you and I have kind of had some advantages, because coming from the projects, you're a projects person, I'm a projects person. We got some experience in these very detailed business processes for oil and gas, or utilities or engineering or whatever, where we could see, okay, how does this whole thing work?
Yeah.
And I think that's one big thing I would say is just be a lifelong learner of business processes. That'd be number one.
Yeah, not even like just to build on that. So like not even in oil and gas, it doesn't even have to be like industry
Yeah.
specific or anything. I stepped into Costco like just after the pandemic sort of phased off, if you will, and I was literally marveling at how they restructured their whole entire food ordering or food service. You know how they have those foods where you can
Yep.
order the $1.50 hot dog or whatever.
Yes.
It's just like I was just marveling at how they were able to renegotiate or renavigate all of that process. I was just
Oh,
literally
yes.
geeking out on that.
Oh, it's funny you bring that up, because we had traveled probably about a month ago, and so we went into a Walmart in another city. It was designed completely different than the Walmarts that we shop at in our area, and I found it very interesting. I had asked some questions. I was very skeptical at first. I had some very again very critical feelings around why it was designed, but then I had talked to a number of people, and they just said, look, Walmart is a big company. Their job is to maximize every inch of that floor. They must feel that that is the best structure. And I thought it was interesting the way, because a few people had more uh, sort of economic, and I had more economic opinions of how it was structured.
Mm.
And I don't want to get too deep without, kind of offending myself or someone else, but it was structured in a way that just not make sense to me. And in fact, they didn't even have, I'll say this, the only fresh fruit they had in the whole place was some grapes. So
Yeah.
they tell, like, which I was shocked, because anyways, but they said, obviously that clientele that shops there is looking for particular items that they would put up more
Mm.
up front, that
Mm.
had more value. And so I thought that's interesting. So, like even something like that, looking and saying, like you said about Costco restructuring it, or why is it designed a different way in a different place?
Mm.
And just you can even ask the question if you want. Ask somebody and say, why would you guys design it this way if you can get access to somebody. But
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah. Okay, so mine would be to take notes. And I mean, I feel like it's so simple to do, but it's so, especially when you are in a new project, in a new environment, new client, take notes on absolutely everything, every meeting, everything, even if it's just a project stand up, even if you're just listening to what other people on the project did yesterday and today, you'll never know what you have acquired. And so I mean I've done this, right? Like this is part of my habit to like take notes on everything. You never know when that information is going to be needed, because I have actually looked back at like these what I thought was zero value added stand-ups, and it turned out that it was so pertinent and so important to track back to when we first sort of talked about something that led to this particular business decision. You never know where that information is going to come from. So take
Mm.
lots and lots of notes.
I love
And
that.
then, yeah, right?
Mm.
It's, yeah, it's so simple. It's so simple.
Yes.
And so I think that, so that's like one from you, one from me. What's the third one? I'll give you the third one.
one thing has helped me over my career, and I know it's more difficult with with working remotely and stuff like that, but I would take people for coffee, even if it's a virtual coffee, and talk with them one on one. Just often, I do it for maybe more than I think. Just say, hey, can we catch up for a few minutes? And I would just talk with them and then ask them questions around their job. And
Mm,
because I think one of the things that I know has helped me over the years is being able to build one thing, I want to say friendship or some camaraderie with the people I work with, where even today I've gone back to people I haven't worked with for 10 years, and I'll ask them questions how they're doing certain things. And what really helps is when a client says, "Hey, we're running into this problem." It may not even technical related. It's just a problem they're running into, and how other companies solved it. I'd say, okay, I'm going to call a couple of other clients and find out, and I just reach out to them. And it's difficult. We and I have actually had quite a few conversations on the podcast around people just reaching out of the blue. You don't hear from them for 10 years, or they only call you when they want things. I would say build those relationships, spend time with them, get to like your clients, get to like the people you work with, get to like the other consultants, and try to nurture those relationships. I know some people who are more, I'm going to use the word shy. I'm not going to use introverted, but people who are more shy and maybe feel a little bit weird asking, I would just say, like, I would really just say, hey, can we get together? I've got some questions for you, and just ask them. I think that for me, I know has been invaluable, just that ability to go back, ask some dumb questions in private that, because we can't remember everything. We can't sometimes, solve every problem. But I know for me, just that was a big thing for me. And I think a lot of my sort of broad experience or knowledge that I can take across industries actually came
mm.
from what other people shared with me.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And so I would surmise that, I mean, I'm taking a look at my situation. I don't really have a whole lot of time to like take people out for coffee, but like I'm on the go, right?
Yeah.
Everybody is on the go. Like if you're taking your child to gymnastics or something, there's other parents there. Start a conversation with them.
Yes.
Like that's all it takes. You're going to be there anyways,
Yes.
right?
That's right. Yes,
I
that's
love it.
exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. Because you can gather tons of knowledge from just the people you're around. And that's
Yeah.
actually how you and I met. That's you and I actually met kind of on a so
I forgot
originally
how we met. It's on
we
LinkedIn somehow.
it was on LinkedIn, and the same client had contacted both of us
Oh,
for
that's
some work,
right.
and then you had
That's right.
contacted me and said we were already connected. You said, hey, just, and then I said, and I was joking. I said, is this client? And you said, yeah. And then we ended up talking, and then
Hey,
yeah, and
you
then
want to do a podcast together?
yeah, well, we were both thinking about doing it, and then you said, hey, I'm doing it. Yeah, so it actually worked out really well. And here we're like, I
Excellent.
think in year 8. So
Oh my gosh. Has it been
yeah,
year 8? It's like
yeah,
2015 or something. Like that's
yes,
crazy. Yeah,
yeah,
wow. Good thing I like you.
yeah, exactly.
All right. So to wrap up, number one, be a lifelong learner of business processes and nothing that you have to do outside of the ordinary, just on your daily life. Start to notice things around you and how things work and how stores organize themselves, etc. Number two, when you are in your work, take notes on everything, every single meeting, everything. And best that I mean, if you're a notebook like kind of writing person, that's great, but it's kind of hard to do a control F on a notebook, right? So like I always like to use OneNote, so where you can quickly look back for keywords, etc. Whatever floats your boat, but take notes. And number three, finally, be interested in people. Ask questions, take people out for coffee, or even if you're on the go, taking your children to whatever extracurricular activity, start talking to the parents there, asking them about their work. And people love it because you're interested in them. Any final words?
No, that's perfect.
Excellent. All right. We invite you to tune in next time when we are going to talk about I have no idea what. I think there's an
Yes.
interview.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Well, you'll find out.
Yes.